Now, normally I do not cover minor iOS updates, but I definitely wanted to talk about iOS 17.4, which is currently in beta and is scheduled to release sometime in March. The major changes that are coming to iOS 17.4 are the App Store changes, especially for those of you who are in the EU or the European Union, which is going to include alternate app stores. Yes, Apple is opening up their ecosystem somewhat and allowing for alternate app stores to be installed on iOS devices. Now, this would generally be considered favorable, but there is somebody out there that does not like this, that definitely is not a fan of Apple and has been sticking to them over the years, and that would be none other than Epic CEO Tim Sweeney, who is calling Apple's latest changes anti-competitive scheme rife with junk fees. Yeah, so he is not too thrilled about what Apple is setting up in their new 17.4, but we're going to dive into that and get into all the details about that. But before I do that, if you're new to this channel and enjoy getting tech news delivered straight to you without any filters and no fluff, then you've come to the right channel. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. All right, let's dive into these articles real quick. So the first article here I want to go over is iOS 17.4 beta brings major app store changes in the EU, including alternate stores. This is coming out of macworld.com. So again, like I said, iOS is in beta right now and is probably coming out sometime around the end of March. So let's very quickly go over what is in iOS 17.4. So a couple of the things that are going to be new options for distributing iOS apps from alternate app marketplaces, new APIs and tools, obviously, new framework and APIs for creating alternative app marketplaces. Marketplace developers can install apps and manage updates on behalf of other developers. New framework and APIs for alternate browser engines, interoperability request form, and there are some safety features as well as notarization of iOS apps. Obviously, that is important for allowing third-party apps, app installation sheets, authorization for marketplace developers, and or additional malware protections as well. So that's just some of the things that are going to be in iOS 17.4. But I wanted to dive into a little bit deeper and let's talk about some of the changes. Another major change that's coming is side loading of apps. Yes, so you will be able to have the opportunity to side load apps in the EU. Now, the reason why Apple is doing this is because the EU put a mandate out. I believe it has a March 6th deadline that Apple has to allow side loading of their apps. And Apple is complying with that and are making necessary changes. Now it's coming in the latest update of 17.4. Now, just quickly, just to sidetrack a little bit, I'm not a huge fan of the government intervening and telling companies what to do with their businesses. I think it's a little too heavy-handed, but I think the EU was saying that this is more of an anti-competitive thing, that they wanted to make sure that they leveled the playing field, so they wanted to make these necessaries upon Apple. That being said, I do think that this is good for Apple to be doing this, allowing you, the person who purchased your $1,100, $1,200 iPhone, to allow you to pretty much do what you want to do with it. You bought that phone, you own it, you take on the inherent risk with that. So you should be allowed to sideload apps or use a third-party app if you want to download apps on there. So I'm glad that this is happening. Unfortunately, it was by the hands of big government that's telling them what to do. But I do think that it overall is a good thing for Apple and the industry as well. So let's just dive into this one. The App Store ecosystem is about to go through its biggest shakeup since the App Store launched in 2008. Apple announced how it plans to change rules for developers using iOS software in the EU in response to the Block Digital Markets Act (DMA) coming into force in March. The big news is that third-party app stores will be allowed on iOS for the first time. Breaking the App Store's position as the sole distributor of iPhone apps. This change will arrive with iOS 17.4 in March. Here's how the new alternative apps marketplaces, as apps call them, will work. As Apple calls them. Users in the EU and on iOS 17.4 will be able to download a marketplace from the marketplace's website in order to be used on an iPhone. Those marketplaces have gone through Apple's approval process. And once you download once, you have to explicitly give it permission to download apps on your device. But once the marketplace is approved and on your device, You can download anything you want, including apps that violate App Store guidelines. You can even set a non-App Store marketplace as your default device. So there you have it. Apple is going to allow you to, well, Apple's going to have a list of approved marketplaces that you will have to go through. And they have to go through Apple's notarization process. They have to get approved by Apple. So even though there are still alternatives, they're still part of Apple. Apple has already gone through them and scrutinized them, and they feel safe with these. So it's kind of, pushing it a little bit, but not quite, because you should be able to just, I would like the ability just to be able to go anywhere and download anything that I want. But Apple is going to restrict it to just an approved list of app or marketplaces. It's better than what it was. It's a step in the right direction, and we'll see how that continues to evolve. Developers, meanwhile, can choose whether to use Apple's payment service or in-app purchases, or integrate a third-party system for payments without paying an additional fee to Apple. If the developers want to stick with Apple's existing in-app payment system, there's an additional 3% processing fee. Now, I do want to continue to read this because there are a number of goodies in here that I definitely want to talk about. Apple still plans to keep a close eye on the app distribution process. All apps must be notarized by Apple, and distribution through third-party marketplace is still managed by Apple's system. Right. Developers will only be allowed to distribute a single version of the apps across different app stores. So no fragmentation, nothing different for different marketplaces. And they'll still have to abide by some basic platform requirements, like getting scanned for malware, which is fine, and I'm okay with that. So the new cost of doing business. So there's some goodies in here. Going forward, developers could pay no commissions to Apple at all in the EU, depending on how they choose to distribute their apps. Apple is making changes to how the fee structure works, both in the App Store and apps newly distributed outside of it. Developers can either choose to use these new business terms or stick with the existing model and continue to distribute through the App Store as normal. Under the new terms, apps distributed through the App Store that choose to use an alternative payment system will pay a 17% commission rather than a 30%. 30%. A lot of people have complained about that high rate. Obviously, Tim Sweeney, which I wanted to talk about quickly, and other apps as well. On digital goods and services, the commission rate falls to 10% for any apps that currently qualify for Apple's reduced small business rate. The additional 3% fee then applies for developers that choose to use Apple's payment processing system. So you're looking at about 13% if you use Apple's payment system, which is what you're going to pay. So it's down from 30%, well, probably 33% or whatever, but it's a significant reduction. And Apple is going to be using those fees for, obviously, to run the marketplace and everything else, the servers and whatever. A lot of people still think that is still too high in itself, even at 17%, but it will, or 10%, which is still too high, but we'll see. MC is being opened up. Alternate browsers are coming. Yeah, that's something else. The company is also introducing a new type of fee for particularly popular apps. The new core technology fee will charge developers €50, around 54 cents per app install. However, this fee only kicks in after 1 million annual installs in the EU. Apple estimates that over 99% of developers will either reduce or maintain the fees they owe to Apple under the new business terms, and that less than 1% of developers would pay a core technology fee. So the big popular apps, Apple is going to see an increase in revenue from this structure. Obviously, they had to figure out a way to offset dropping the percent of the commission from the 30% down to 10%. So they figure they're going to make it up on the back end with, the very popular apps, which there are a number of them. Obviously, your main apps that everybody uses will more than likely be hit with that core technology fee. As well as allowing alternative app stores and payment systems, Apple is also opening up their other aspects of the iOS ecosystem in the EU. Alternate browser engines for WebKit. This will be allowed for the first time. Users will get their choice of alternative browsers to install when they open up Safari for the first time in iOS. So there you have it. That is Apple opening up with some fee structure. So it's good to see some of that. See that they are lowering it, but there is some, like I said, let me read this paragraph right here. The DMA effect. These changes are likely to be seized upon by developers that have been critical of Apple's control over iOS app distribution. Earlier this week, Spotify, a longtime critic of Apple's 30% commission rate, announced plans to bring in-app purchases back to the iOS apps so that users upgrade subscriptions or buy audiobooks from in the EU after the DMA comes into force. But it's unclear whether the company will be happy to continue to pay a 17% commission to Apple if it's using an alternative payment processor. It has already been critical of Apple's plans to charge a 27% commission on alternative payments in the US. That is ridiculous right there. Like, if you don't want to use Apple's system, you want to use alternative, they want to force you to use their system. And then they charge you 27%. That is just straight up just gouging you out of your money if you don't want to comply with Apple's. But again, not only is Spotify complaining about it, let's talk about Tim Sweeney. Like I said, he called their latest changes anti-competitive scheme rife with junk fees. So let's take a look at his comments. Epic CEO Tim Sweeney has immediately come out to criticize the changes. He did an X post that we're going to read in full, so I want to make sure you get his full comments. Sweeney says the new rules are an anti-competitive scheme rife with junk fees and an example of malicious compliance. All right, so let's take a look at what he said over here on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. Apple's plan to thwart Europe's new Digital Markets Act law is a devious new instance of malicious compliance. They are forcing developers to choose between App Store exclusivity and the store terms, which would be illegal under DMA, or accept a new, also illegal anti-competitive scheme rife with new junk fees on downloads and new Apple taxes on payments that they don't process. So Apple doesn't process them, but they still get a fee from that. Apple proposes that it can choose which stores are allowed to compete with their app store. That's the marketplace to select ones that Apple said that they could use. They could block Epic from launching the Epic Game Stores and distributing Fortnite through it, for example, or block Microsoft, Valve, GOG, or new entrants. The Epic Game Store is the number 7 software store in the world, behind number 3 console stores, 2 mobile stores, and Steam on PC. Here's where I have a problem with his whole statement right here. We're determined to launch on iOS and Android and enter the competition to become the number 1 multi-platform software store on the foundation of payment competition, 0 to 12% fees, and exclusive games like Fortnite. So criticisms, I have no problem with that. I think all that is fine. I think if you're criticizing another company, I don't think this was a good look or a good statement to say that your desire is to become the number 1 multi-platform software store. I get it. It's competition. That's your goal of your business. You want to do that. But I just think he should have omitted that from his statement. It just makes him look even more greedy, and that all he really wants is to become the number 1 dominant force for the game store and the Epic Game Store. So I just think he should have left that out. I think his statement would have been better off overall if he would have just left that out. Epic has always supported the notion of Apple notarization and malware scanning for apps, but we strongly reject Apple's twisting this process to undermine competition and continue imposing Apple taxes on transactions that they're not involved in. And I would tend to agree with that. If they're not involved in it, why are they charging you money for that? There's a lot more hot garbage in Apple's announcement. It will take more time to parse both the written and unwritten parts of this new horror show. So stay tuned. Stay tuned. He obviously going to be diving into a little bit more, and there will be more comments coming from him down the pipeline. So this is just starting, so we'll see what happens with that. And if you go down in the comments, some people are agreeing with him, some people are disagreeing with him, calling him out for obviously his history of what he's been through with Apple. So again, I will link that down there in the description if you want to go take that. Just a quick note, all of these articles will be down in the description, so you can actually go and read some of those more in depth. But seeing that they're going to allow that Apple Store to alternate Apple stores, so the first thought you would be thinking is that, well, if I'm outside the EU, is there a way I can still get this? Can I just use the VPN or whatever? Not so fast, okay? How Apple will stop iPhone sideloading outside of the EU. So you knew Apple would have a way to stop this. So let's take a look at, I'm not going to read this whole article. I'm just going to go down to where the actual restrictions are. So here's how iOS will block sideloading if you're not in the EU. So first of all, it's going to check what your Apple ID billing address is. So if your billing address is not in the EU, this is pretty much just going to stop you right there. If you're in the United States or anywhere else, then it doesn't matter. A VPN won't matter. The user's current location, apparently Apple is not only cracking in is only checking the country and not precise location for privacy reasons. The current region set in your iOS settings and a device class, whether it's an iPhone or iPad, etc. So it's going to be very difficult to bypass the system. I'm sure there's going to be a way once the developers out there get their hands on it. There's going to be a way, but right now, VPN will not work for you. You won't be able to trick it because it's going to look at specific details within your Apple ID. So that thought of, oh, okay, now this is open, I get to use it. That's not going to happen for you. Sorry to bust your bubble, but VPN will not work for you in this case. But that is everything I wanted to cover in this video regarding Apple's iOS 17.4 beta, which is coming with the alternate App Store changes. Let me know what you think about this whole situation about this. If you're in the EU, let me know if you're looking forward to this. If you're not in the EU, do you think Apple should bring this to the United States or every other country? Because as of right now, Apple does not believe, or they don't think that they will bring this to any other countries. They're citing safety concerns, obviously, but whatever. It's your device. You should be able to take that inherent risk yourself. If you want to load malicious software, that's on you. But just let me know down in the comment section what you think about this. Once again, thank you for taking time out to watch this video. If you enjoy getting tech news delivered straight to you without any fluff or filters, you've again come to the right place. Hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to hit that notification bell. And chances are, if you enjoy this type of content, you have friends or family that enjoy this as well. So make sure you share this with them. Also, make sure you hit that like button as well. If you want to stay up to date with the latest tech news, head over to SoundsNerdy.com, where I curate and aggregate tech news from around the web covering Apple, Samsung, Google, Android, computing, and even more general tech news, all at SoundsNerdy.com. And for more tech news in video form, check out one of these two videos right here. And until next video, guys, stay nerdy.